I didn't think that I'd ever be doing a video about Canada, but as it turns out, with everything happening north of the border and all the chaos that's been going on with the Great Trucker Rebellion and Trudeau's abusive response, this is worth covering. Thank you for watching. My name's Glenn Morgan, and this is We the Govern. And as I mentioned, I didn't think I'd be talking about Canada too much, and I have to start out this video describing a little bit for mostly American viewers where Canada's located. And the only reason I'm saying that is that many surveys have shown that a shockingly high percentage of Americans, somewhere between 20 and 40%, if any of these surveys are to be believed, actually don't know where Canada is on a map. So just to help people out, I wanted to make sure that it is easy for you to recognize that Canada is the country to the north of America. And if you've had a Common Core education and missed out on geography, hopefully this will help you place it better in your mind. Now, I have to admit, I never thought that I would ever be doing a video about Canada at all. It is a quiet country that most people hardly notice that anything's happening. Maybe maple syrup, maybe there's other things that people would recognize about Canada, maybe hockey. But it's generally not certainly not a country I'd be talking about that has anything to do with politics. But I do live in Washington State, and for those of us who live here, Canada is just our border to the north, and it is a neighbor for us. And right now, as I'm filming this video, I'm actually doing that in Vancouver, Washington, not to be confused with Vancouver, BC, up to our north. And Vancouver, BC is a place I have spent a lot of time. Back in the 90s, actually, I worked at a startup company up there once for almost a year. Really made a lot of good friends at that time, and a younger group that I was working with in a startup company as an American contractor, had to cross the border all the time, and got to know BC, which is a beautiful city, and spent a lot of time there. And anybody that spent any time in up there in British Columbia knows that it's not just Whistler and Vancouver. There's just it's a beautiful place. British Columbia is a huge province. There's a lot to see, and I would encourage that when they actually open it up for tourism once again, that you go up there and visit. It's actually a really, really neat part of the world to see. So it just seems shocking and surprising to me after spending all that time and finding out how, for the most part, the Canadians that I worked with didn't have anything to do with any kind of political ideas. Generally, they were usually pretty resistant to even talking about those issues. To see them with a trucker protest, the way that it's gained this national prominence, was, to be honest, quite a surprise. I didn't really expect that to happen. I also didn't really think it would get the attention that it ended up getting. And this was really kind of an amazing protest in a classic Canadian sense, where all of these workers got together, and it looks like it was originally driven by the mandates, but it kind of morphed into this protest opposing a lot of the government policies that have been very heavy-handed in Canada, just like they've been in Australia or New Zealand or America and England and just all around the world, countries that had decided to go completely over the top and throw freedom out the window, and freedom and liberty being a long-forgotten idea in some of these countries. And so this protest basically unfolded with these truckers who did not like being forced isolated in their cabs to take the vaccine if they didn't want to. If the mandate seemed to be pretty egregious and put a lot of pressure on them. And so that was kind of the genesis of this protest, although it's worth noting that a good percentage of the people who were protesting apparently were vaccinated, and it was more than just about the vaccine. Nevertheless, you had a bunch of truckers show up in Ottawa, in the capital of Canada, and they're blocking the government district, and they are annoying the political elite. And if there's one thing you're not allowed to do, apparently in any Western country anymore, and that is annoy the political elite, because they can't stand a protest that is against their policies. That seems to be something that is not allowed any longer in a modern Western country, which is why I think this protest generated so much interest from around the world. And who the heck would ever think that it would come out of Canada? And this protest also had kind of some unique angles to it. You'd never see this in Antifa or BLM, where they had bouncy houses for the kids, and turning it into a full family affair. The media appeared to be mostly offended by that, but yet that was part of what was going on. And of course, in true Canadian style, they had to have street hockey. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, then you haven't been to Canada and you don't live anywhere near it, but nevertheless, that is the national pastime in Canada, and hockey's a big deal, and why not? If you're going to have a protest and occupy the Capitol for a while, you might as well set up a quick street hockey area and play it. And of course, they played that up for the cameras as well. That appeared to also offend the Canadian government. That's certainly a great crime. And you saw when Tucker Carlson was talking about this whole event, calling it the Bay of Rigs, which is kind of a reference back to the Bay of Pigs in the 1960s with the Kennedy administration and an early scandal that they had there. And Trudeau, who is the Prime Minister of Canada, clearly went just as out of control. And that's this guy right here. Now, most people in America don't know who the Prime Minister is of Canada at any given period of time, but Trudeau's done a really good job getting his face out there, whether it's when he painted it black back when a couple years ago before he became Prime Minister, and this has just seemed, for some reason, this guy seems to dress up in a lot of costumes. And for most of the time, the left usually calls this cultural appropriation or even racist. But of course, when the Prime Minister of Canada does it, and he's a nice progressive, in with the in crowd, in with Davos, in with the Great Reset, this guy is one of them. And so therefore, he can pretty much do anything he wants, and he can mock any kind of ethnicity that he feels like mocking at any given period of time. Like I said, dressing up his costume is a full-time thing for him. I don't quite know why he likes to do that so much, but and I don't know why these progressives seem to enjoy this, but this is what they do, and this is your Prime Minister of Canada in action all over the place. And also in true progressive form, there's no dictator in the world that this guy doesn't seem to have completely fallen in love with. When Fidel Castro died in Cuba in 2016, Trudeau was actually quoted saying many nice things about him, and there was any opportunity he apparently has to meet with a dictator or to say something nice about him, he usually does. And that is a substantial contrast with how he decided to attack the working class truck drivers in Canada who dared to stand up against his policies. How dare they? And they had a protest, which is even worse. And so therefore, there is no limit to which somebody like this appears to be willing to go in order to end that protest as quick as possible, because something like this really did throw the political leadership and elite in Canada off, and so Trudeau decided that there could be no greater crime. And of course, for this, he was roundly mocked around the world and his own country, because obviously there's nothing worse than having a bunch of people in your community come up and peacefully come to the Capitol and ask for a redress of grievances. In Canada, this just is not allowed, apparently. Up until recently, we always thought it was, but as it turns out, even though this guy dresses up in blackface all the time, Mr. Blackface himself said, nope, you cannot do that. Whatever you do, we are not going to allow your protest to proceed. Now, this is not a scene you typically see in Canada. You have to understand this is a country that doesn't believe in the private ownership of firearms for their citizens. They've done their best to take those away, and of course, they decided to send out the SWAT teams and the heavily armed paramilitaries to come out and shut down this protest. This was very heavy-handed by any standards, but in particular for Canada, this just seemed to be a complete overreaction, considering the nature of the protests and the fact that it had been peaceful for so long until Trudeau's government gets involved. And of course, this also generated additional attention when they decided to run their mounted police into the protests. And there's a lot of stories right now as to who got hurt and who ran over grandma with a walker. But it does appear that they injured a number of protesters with their horses. And it does appear also to be totally unnecessary. And this is also kind of part of the unfolding drama. Now listen, you're always going to have something like this happen when a protest that's been blocking traffic for a long period of time, eventually they probably will. Any government's going to come in and find a way to shut it down or have it end. You can choose to either do that in a very peaceful way, or you can use as heavy-handed a way as possible, which is what the approach that Canada took. What really made this kind of unique, though, more than just shutting down or ending the protests, was the desire of the Canadian government to just go full destruction of freedom and liberties beyond anything I've seen a modern Western country do. And the specific thing here was actually this effort to basically give banks the ability to freeze all funds and apparently seize all the funds of anybody, not just anybody who they have identified and were able to say that they were part of the protests, but also anybody who was funding the protests. So if somebody donated money to the protests, they shut your bank account down, or at least they've given them the ability to, and they're rapidly doing it every day, apparently identifying more people who gave money to this protest, and they raised almost $10 million of supporters, both from Americans and and Canadians. At this point, I think they're just seizing all the Canadians' assets, but it's completely ridiculous. They're shutting down the GoFundMe site. Of course, the GoFundMe, as predicted, sided with the establishment, and so Give, Send, Go accounts were set up, and then those are being attacked, and they're really just doing this very, very heavy-handed effort. And Chrystia Freeland, who, no irony with that last name, there's nothing free about her, there's nothing about freedom or liberty in her makeup. This has just become another elitist. She has been assigned by the Canadian government to work closely with Trudeau to enforce a lot of these abusive regulations and banking regulations on the public. And of course, in true, just as a very abusive way, they want to make all these regulations permanent so that anytime you disagree with the Canadian government, they can come in and just seize your assets, take your trucks, end your licenses, take your business. I mean, this is exceptionally abusive. And this does raise a lot of concerns. This raises concerns for everybody around the world, because if a relatively sleepy country like Canada that generally doesn't make national news with protests, and certainly doesn't seem to be a country that has a history of abusing its citizens like this, if they've been willing to go from 0 to 60 so quickly and destroying and throwing out all freedom and liberty just because some people decide to have a peaceful protest in the Capitol, what else is coming? And what other ideas are they going to give to other people? Now, Freeland's been known to be a close associate of George Soros. This has been documented pretty well. This Davos crowd does tend to hang around with each other, and so it's probably no surprise that they're all chummy and the Great Reset and all that good stuff. This is a crew that seems to really be into that. But it inevitably leads to memes and images that people are going to make about their political leadership. And they seem to be mystified as to why people don't trust them or believe them right now. This has been an incredibly over-the-top response to a very relatively mild protest in the big scheme of things. Keep in mind, neither of these people and none of the Canadian government responded at all to violent protests where people are actually injured and property was damaged in the 2020 riots with BLM or Antifa, nor did they really go out and condemn those either. So they don't seem to care about that type of protest because arguably they probably agreed with some of the goals of the protesters that were burning down the cities in a mostly peaceful way, peaceful arson, peaceful assault. Now, in this case, when people actually do gather and oppose the policies that these political elites love, now there is no limit, and freedom is long gone, and your individual liberty is long gone, and they're going to take and seize every asset. Who knows how long they're going to arrest these people, and of course, seizing their trucks and just having this completely over-the-top response. That's how these guys roll, and this is a problem. And of course, it also lends itself to the fact that Trudeau has a history of cozying up to tyrants all around the world. And you got to have people in China and in Russia, Putin in Russia, and North Korea looking at Canada saying, well, look at, they'll be able to use this example forever as, hey, if they're doing it, that's nothing compared to what we're doing in our country, or certainly using that as an excuse for what they're going to do to suppress their people. So normally Western countries up until recently had wanted to show and demonstrate that they would allow protests and that freedom, individual thought, and that was allowed, that you could dissent against the government without abuse. But apparently Canada's decided that's no longer true anymore, which of course leads to all kinds of other responses just like this all around. People are not generally happy watching this, the tyrant of the North and Canada go down this road. It is very absurd, and it's not a good scene. This is actually pretty ugly, and it's sad. I mean, it's easy to mock because of who would even think about paying attention to Canada? But yet this is going on, and it's really concerning because if Canada's willing to do this, who else is willing to follow? Is President Biden now getting new ideas of how he can abuse people even more than he already has? Is it inspiring others to also go down that same road? Now, I know a lot of people believe that they don't want to be in politics, right, or be involved in politics. Totally understandable, because look at the ugliness that we oftentimes find in the political process. And it's kind of mudslinging and it's messy. And so most people don't really want to care. But eventually, it really doesn't matter if you don't want to care or be involved. You're going to be forced to be involved because they're taking an interest in you. They're taking interest in everything about you. They're jacking up your taxes, they're taking away your freedom, taking away your liberties. And at some point in time, most people are going to wake up and realize that they've lost something substantial, something rare in human history to have, this freedom and liberty, and also the idea that dissent is allowed. And losing that in a country like Canada, our next door neighbor, our boring country to our north, a country where I worked for almost a year, had a lot of friends up there, and never had much of a negative opinion about what was going on up there. But boy, at this point in time, the world's opinion of Canada has changed. And in the process of doing that, it's also made us reflect on what's going on in our own countries. It matters. If the people of Canada are going to lose their freedom and liberty so easily over nothing, just a protest, just dissenting against their government, and if a government like Canada, that's usually considered very benign and frankly quite boring most of the time, if they're willing to use violence and intimidation and threats like this to silence their population, just how bad of a shape are we actually in around the world when it comes to freedom and liberty? And I'd say that it's a big concern right now. Our freedom and liberty is being challenged and threatened from all corners, even those most unexpected, like in Canada. So, Canada, we are concerned about what's going on up there, and at least living in Washington State, that's a neighboring place to me, and it matters when I see that kind of thing happen just across the border. And I hope that we get this under control and stop this as soon as possible, because abusing freedom and liberty like this, unfortunately, it's just as contagious as any other bad idea, and the last thing we want is for it to come down to on our side of the border even more than it already is. So if you want to learn more, feel free to go to some of the articles that I've linked down below. Feel free to go to wethegovern.com. If you want to learn more about what I've been up to, feel free to subscribe to our free email newsletter. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. And remember, I really care about activism. That's why this really means a lot to me, because I think that peaceful dissent should be allowed in any country, and that it's not right to seize the assets of people who you don't like just because you can. So the only way to stop that is by showing up and becoming more engaged, not less. Because in the end, the future belongs to those who show up.